From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is All Things with Kim Strassel, a Potomac Watch podcast.
Welcome to All Things with Kim Strassel, a weekly opinion journal podcast. And this week, I am here with Tim Sheehy, former Navy SEAL and businessman, who's challenging Jon Tester for his Montana Senate seat in a race that could decide if Republicans retake the Senate. Tim, it's so great to have you on the show. I was just down in Montana last week in Billings. I think I ran into quite a few people you know. It's beautiful as always. And I wanted to start a little by talking about the state. All eyes are on Montana. Senate right now is currently split 51-49 for Democrats. West Virginia, barring some supernatural event, is going to go Republican after the retirement of Joe Manchin. So Republicans need one more to get control, and your state is where both sides have dug in for battle. And I wanted to just ask you a little bit about the dynamics there. This is a red state. Trump won it by 16 points in 2020, and yet Jon Tester has just been a mainstay in politics in Montana since the 1990s. He was first elected to the U.S. Senate in 2005, now running for his fourth term. He's done it by very much presenting himself as working class, a dirt farmer, defender of veterans, in tune with Montana values. He's never won by double digits, but he has won decisively in his races. Now, however, the polls show in the Real Clear Politics average, you are up by 6.5 points. So my question to you is, what's changed in Montana? Has the state changed? Has its makeup changed? Have the issues changed? Has he changed? Is it something about your candidacy? Why is he suddenly in trouble?
Well, I'd say it's all the above, Kim, and I think it's important not to go too deep into history, but it is just as a table set important. You already drew the comparison with West Virginia, with Jim Justice replacing Joe Manchin. There's a lot of similarities between the political makeup of West Virginia and Montana. You know, West Virginia not too long ago was a deep blue state. You know, union coal miners, it was a labor, blue dog Democrats. Montana's not too different. It's important to remember just about 9 years ago, 7 out of 8 statewide major elected offices were held by Democrats here in Montana.
Amazing. Yeah.
And, you know, we had a Democrat governors for 16 years, and we haven't had 2 Republican senators since the late 19th century. So Montana really is a purple state in its history and frankly, a blue state for a lot of its history. I mean, the second longest serving Senate majority leader in history, Mike Mansfield, Montana Democrat. You know, when Tester first came into office, we were a solidly purple state, and Montanans have basically shown for over a century they like to have Democrat senators. They kind of alternated the governors, Republican, Democrat. Congressman was normally Republican, and they normally went, you know, not decisively, but by 2, 3, 4, 5 points for Republican president. What's changed, as you pointed out, here in these last 8 years is a pretty hard rightward shift in the state politics. And obviously, most of that's going to be attributed to the fact that the Democrat Party has left the state. Now, I don't say Montanans have left the Democrat Party. The values of the Democrat Party are no longer those of blue-collar working class Americans. They're no longer those of ranchers and farmers. And that's why we've seen, you know, the Prairie Democrats from Heidkamp and Tom Daschle to Jon Tester, you know, are facing a much more challenging environment because their party is no longer reflecting the values that, you know, arguably they did 100 years ago or even 50 years ago. So I think, you know, that's an important underlayment there. But, you know, then, of course, lay on top of that so many of our more current political issues. Of course, Donald Trump's very, very popular, especially among working class Americans, especially among blue collar people who work with their hands. Very popular there. And then you look at socially conservative issues where Montana is a socially conservative state. And even those who used to vote Democrat, you know, they'd be the kind of Democrat who are pro-gun, pro-life, pro-cop, pro-border Democrat. And those don't exist a whole lot anymore in America. And those people have said, hey, I voted for Democrats my whole life, but I'm switching. And Jon Tester has been very skilled, as you said. You know, he's never to be underestimated. You know, we're not dancing a victory dance at all. He is a very skilled politician with far more resources than we have and a very, very friendly media complex that's doing everything they can to keep him in office. But he is skilled at doing exactly what you described, which is come back home, appeal to everyday Montanans, and basically convince them he's a Republican or a conservative, and then go to D.C. and vote every single time with the liberals, which is what he does. So what we've done this cycle, which I think has been different than previous cycles, is number one, we've run a very aggressive ground campaign with 600-ish thousand voters. I could damn near shake every hand and meet everyone. And that's exactly what we've been for the last 18 months. You go to Billings and meet a lot of people that know me. It's like, yeah, it's a small state population-wise, big state geography, small state population-wise. and really connecting with people directly, not letting the media filter my words and edit them, not letting, the journalists put their spin on things. We just say, you know what, we're not going to get a fair shake from the media here anyways. So we're just going to go meet people, and I'm just going to spend a year and a half, 4 or 5 events a day going to every single town, and I'm going to speak to these people and listen to these people. And that's what's working. And I think there's one other final piece I'll add in that's an important differentiator here. Veterans, you brought it up. Jon Tester's chair of the VA committee. He's been a ranking member on the committee. He's been on the committee for, I think, his entire time in the Senate. And as a state, we're normally tied with Alaska, your hometown there, your home state, where we're the highest state for veteran population, with Alaska about 10.5–11% of our population is veterans. And, the national average is 1.5%. So it's a massively important electorate here. And of course, they vote also. They fought for it, so they voted a higher turnout. So arguably, I don't know how the exact numbers, but they're probably about 15% of the electorate, given how much they vote, maybe 12, maybe 13, but they outpace their population in voting power because of that. And he's always done very well at pandering to them. And I say pandering because that's what I mean. I don't think he's really done a whole lot for veterans, but he's very good at taking credit for any bill that flies through legislation, throws his name on it, loves to throw the rhetoric out there. But when you look at the actual performance of the VA, it's been going down. The VA is a lot of great people and a very broken bureaucracy, and he is accountable. So he's never run against a veteran ever in his political career. So me being a combat wounded veteran, married to a combat veteran, my wife was a Marine, I have a little more authority than he does to speak about veterans issues, and I think that's helped.
Yeah, you just brought up something I wanted to get to. Maybe you already answered the question, but Montana's fascinating because obviously a lot of split ticket voters. It has that history you just gave is so important, but it has shifted. Trump did win the state by 16 points 4 years ago. And that means that there are a number of voters in Montana who are going to the polls, and during the presidential, they're voting for a Republican, but they are voting consistently for a Democratic senator. Now, one thing that is different this time around, I'd love to get your take on whether or not you think it will make a difference. Jon Tester hasn't been on the ballot during a presidential race since 2012. So he's never run alongside Donald Trump on a ballot. But those people that are the split ticket voters, how are you reaching them? How are you trying to find them and convince them? Is it just about shaking hands, getting them to let them know you? Or are there specific things that in the past have made them want to vote for a Democrat? And how do you convince them otherwise?
Yeah, a couple of things there. And it's a great point because, that is the election. So you just honed in on the election, which is making sure people understand what they're voting for. And I think there's a few issues there that we got to unpack. Number one is the expertly crafted political image that Jon Tester has. Number one, he's a talented politician, but also, guess what? They've spent about $150 million, $200 million, across every election cycle building this image around him too. So it's not just that he's good at it. He also has massive resources every time. But, he's part of the Lucky Calendar Club, was elected in 06, 12, and 18. 06 was a great year for Democrats. 12 was too. 18 was a great year for Democrats. And honestly, a lot of people, especially a lot of our low information voters, actually think Jon Tester's a Republican. He doesn't go out there and say, I'm a Democrat. Right. He basically runs like Trump Republican. Just like Bob Casey now and Slotkin, he's running ads touting how he works with President Trump, even though, of course, he voted to impeach him twice. So I think the split ticket voting nationwide, as you alluded to, is becoming less common. But also, he's had favorable tailwinds every time, he's been on the ballot, where he hasn't had to differentiate himself from the Republican candidate that much. When Mitt Romney ran against Obama in 12, that wasn't a decisive win here in Montana. He won a few points, but it wasn't a 16 to 20 point landslide like we see with Trump. So, this time it is proving much, much harder for him to differentiate himself, from the Democrats on the ticket when he's running against Trump. And of course, the fact that since the last election, he's voted to impeach Trump twice, and of course, voted for everything the Biden-Harris administration rolled out for him. And that's another important point, Kim, to remember is, these last 3.5 years in the Senate, where it's been a razor thin Democrat majority with the vice president, and of course, with Manchin and Sinema sometimes defecting, he hasn't been able to hide behind messaging bills this time, because they have needed his vote every single time, and he's provided it every single time. We haven't dead to rights on a voting record that he just cannot run from, no matter how hard he tries. So, he'll throw up distractions and scandals and lies and smear and all that. And all I have to say is, okay, well, that's untrue. But guess what? He voted with Biden-Harris administration every time, voted to impeach Trump twice. Does that sound like a moderate to you? And pretty quickly folks come back to reality on that. So he's never been elected in such a challenging electoral environment as this, where Montanans who are, although they're independent and kind of libertarian by nature, they want conservative policies right now. Clearly, they want conservative policies on the national level.
On that policy front, he's understandably trying to make this race a little bit more local, talk about local issues, farming, public lands use, housing. And that's something a lot of Democratic candidates are doing right now. Understandably, obvious reasons, because they're trying to distance themselves from unpopular national president and national policies. You've talked much more about those bigger issues, inflation, immigration, interest rates. What is dominating there? Or is it that these national issues have actually become in many ways local issues? For instance, immigration.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. And again, I'm a first-time politician, never even run for student council or county commission. So, I've jumped right in the deep end here, but I'm learning as I'm going. And I'll tell you, growing up, you always hear the adage, all politics is local. And I think that adage is true. But guess what? National policies are having devastating local effects. So I think all politics are local. But guess what? Those local impacts, like $3.50 gasoline a gallon, expensive groceries, crime in the street, human trafficking, expensive housing, those issues are the result of failed national policies of this administration. They're trying to divert it to other boutique local issues. But, we just keep dragging it back to the fact that these local issues, you want to talk about housing prices, Jon Tester? Great. Let's talk about housing prices. Let's talk about massive inflation, highest interest rates in a generation, the inability to get labor and to get materials to build homes because of these idiotic economic policies of this administration. And of course, let's talk about immigration, which is something that's so rarely talked about when we discuss housing prices. They always want to blame developers and banks and all that. I'm sure blame plenty to go around, but we've also had an unprecedented influx of people coming into this country, the likes of we've never seen so fast. And when you inject, the scary thing is we don't even know the number, 10 to 20 million of people of demand, 2 to 3 to 4 to 5% demand increase in 3.5 years into an inelastic market, economic supply and demand. When the supply is basically inelastic, which housing is probably one of the most inelastic supply sides of any equation in the modern economy, and you inject a ton of demand into it right away, unforecasted, unpredicted, that's going to drive housing costs up, which it has nationwide. And when they want to blame it in Montana on, rich out-of-staters and vacationers, okay, they may have a bit of influence, but how about we talk about the fact that we've added 20 million people of demand, and whether those people are high income or not, they need a roof over their head. And that will drive up demand and drive up prices. So I think the housing argument that a lot of these Democrats are trying to run to just falls flat because people rightfully point to the administration in charge during that housing crisis. And guess what? It's been Democrats, which they voted for. And then other local issues, you mentioned public lands, which obviously being from Alaska, you understand that as well. Our western states, especially Alaska, but Montana as well, like Nevada's 97% federal.
Yeah.
And, here in Montana, we're about a third federal land, so not quite as much, but still very significant. One of the run to home base issues for Democrats running in Montana is always public lands. They want to accuse the Republicans of plotting a secret plot to sell off public lands for money, which, of course, that's ridiculous. It's never been proposed. It's never been written about. It's simply something that they love to throw out there because they know that the conservative hunters and fishers that could be split ticket voters, oh, my favorite fishing spot?
Sure.
He's going to sell that? Oh, no, I better vote for the Democrat because he's going to save it. Even though, some of our Republican leaders have presided over some of the most expansive public lands policy ever. So I think that issue also, they trot that one out every election cycle against every Republican. It's flat out untrue. The people have pretty much digested that. And I think that one falls flat too. But I think you're right. It's fascinating to see these Democrat Senate candidates scramble for a message that resonates because they can't hitch their wagon to the coattails of Joe Biden and they can't hitch their wagon to the coattails of these failed policies. So they got to make up distractions, which is, it's what they're doing.
Yeah, I think, by the way, some of us Westerners would just be happy if when it came to public lands, they were well managed and they weren't burnt to the ground. So we're going to take a break. When we come back, more with Tim Sheehy.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is All Things with Kim Strassel, a Potomac Watch podcast.
Welcome back. I'm Kim Strassel here at All Things. I'm here with Tim Sheehy. We're talking about the Montana Senate race. Another issue, which you didn't mention, but it is also the ultimate national but now state issue, obviously, is abortion. Democrats have been using it to great effect against Republicans in recent cycles. Montana has an initiative on the ballot this year which would place the right to an abortion in the Montana Constitution. And this all stems from this 1999 state Supreme Court ruling that said there is a constitutional right to privacy that prevented any restrictions on abortion prior to viability. This has been bounced around in the state a lot. Republican legislators have tried to overturn it. There's a lot of worry among Republicans nationwide that some of these initiatives out there are going to drive Democratic turnout. How are you handling the issue of abortion in the state, and how concerned are you about the initiative being there in a way that drives the other side to get out the vote or changes votes?
100%. I mean, we have to be focused on the issue. I think what happened in 22, quite frankly, is that Supreme Court decision was, the Dobbs decision was just obviously caught everyone flat-footed, and the Republicans quite clearly were deer in the headlights. You know, they had no idea what to say, no idea what to do. And the Democrats, I mean, they just drove a truck through that one, and it crushed us. And frankly, rightfully so. I mean, we were so pathetically unready to discuss that issue in a meaningful way. It's hard for me to feel bad for us on that, because it was just like, you know what, guys, we were not ready to speak on that issue like adults. And I think J.D. Vance said it great in his debate. This is an issue Republicans have to earn trust on again, because when you really look at the extremism on the abortion issue, it's not the Republicans. It really is the Democrats. I mean, what they're advocating for is the most extreme abortion legislation in the world. It just is. I mean, basically unfettered, unrestricted abortion up to and including the moment of birth, taxpayer funded with basically no restrictions. There's really like no modern society in the world that does that. Even Western Europe, where the socialist utopias that the Democrats love to point to, even they don't do that. And what most of the Republicans are standing up for is saying, listen, we need to have some common sense on this issue. Yeah, of course, we have to have exceptions. There's no question that, you know, a mother in danger with health risk, of course, has the right to protect her life and make whatever decision she has to do. Rape, incest, life of the mother, all these exceptions, those make sense. But at some point, when you have a viable life in the womb, do we not have some obligation as civilized people to also consider the consequences of that and to consider that that life also has rights? So I think the issue, of course, I think will always be one, at least for the foreseeable future, is going to be a challenge for Republicans to navigate, because even if we present a common sense position, which is my position, like I just did, just driving here back to the office here, I was listening to a radio commercial about me from the Montana Democrats saying that I reject all abortions completely, no exceptions, and was going to arrest women and doctors. Literally, that's what they're telling people. Tim Sheehy will arrest your doctors and mothers and ban all abortions 100%, which of course, I've never said that, never advocated for that, nor has, you know, any Republican I know. But, you know, that's how they're weaponizing the issue. And unfortunately, you know, we've got to get back on our front foot there. But specifically to our CI in Montana, I'm a law and order candidate. I've told everyone, listen, the people in Montana vote for a constitutional amendment. That's the law of the land. I may not agree with it from a policy perspective, but I'm a law and order candidate. And if the people decide they're going to amend the Constitution, then they do so. But, you know, as you alluded to in Montana, the history of this at the state Supreme Court level, the state constitution, at the legislature, it's so muddy that basically abortion is essentially legal right now in Montana anyways. So this CI is really just further enshrining a right that the state Supreme Court says already exists. So I think it's really a get out the vote tactic. However, to put a cherry on top of all this, I don't think it'll fundamentally change turnout. I mean, the Democrats have already whipped this horse so hard to get voter turnout that, you know, is one more CI going to make extra people show up for this than they would have already been to vote for Jon Tester and Kamala Harris? I don't think so. That's what my gut says, and our polling kind of reflects that those people who are going to show up to vote for CI are going to show up and vote for Democrats down ballot anyways.
Yeah, it does strike me. We know why they tried so hard to get it on the ballot in Montana to use it in the Senate race, but it also strikes me, given, as you noted, that this is already legal, that it probably won't have the same sense of urgency that some people have felt in other states where this has been on the ballot. We're going to take one more break. When we're back, more on this Montana Senate race.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is All Things with Kim Strassel, a Potomac Watch podcast.
Welcome back. I am here with Tim Sheehy challenging Jon Tester in Montana for a Senate seat. To me, the best proof that you are winning on the issues in this debate and that Tester feels worried about this is that in these final weeks of the race, although it's been going on for longer than just the final weeks, but there have just been an enormous ramp up in personal attacks attacks on you, but also on your company. And I wrote a column about this a couple of weeks ago. We got to talk at the time. You started this firm, Bridger Aerospace, to make use of your experience with infrared surveillance during your time as a Navy SEAL and to bring it to aerial firefighting in Montana. So you've started this local Montana company. It went public last year. But now there seems to be this concerted effort by Democrats and their friends in the media to trash on it, to suggest that it's not successful. For all that I can see is for the reason of claiming that you are a failed businessman. And this to me is different than attacks we have seen in the past. I mean, everyone is used to Democrats ripping on Republican businessmen, the wealthy, the super rich. I remember Mitt Romney and the ceaseless attacks on him and his career at Bain Capital. But this is different because this is a local business. It employs local Montanans. Many of them are veterans. They're doing a pretty worthwhile mission fighting fires. And yet the goal seems to be to destroy it for no other reason than to gain against you in a political campaign. What kind of message does that send to Montanans and also to other businessmen who might consider going into office?
It sends a message that you better be careful. It's a warning. It's not just an attempt to smear me. I also believe it's an attempt to scare off smart, successful people from getting involved in the game. Because, let's face it, the swamp and the machine, they want career politicians who need the paycheck, need the lobbyist cash, are cogs in the system and won't upset the apple cart. When you get guys like Donald Trump or myself or, many other successful business folks in office who don't need to get the lobbying job or the board position after office because they've already made their money, and they can say, listen, I'm going to do what's right. I'll lose money doing this job, not gain it like so many of these career politicians like Pelosi and Tester who've gotten exponentially richer in office. I will lose money in office, as many of these business people are. So I think it not only is it an attempt to just smear me, it's a warning to say, hey, look what'll happen to you if you decide to get in this. And in fact, I think something like, $9 billion of revenue in our state worth of business owners wrote a large op-ed to our statewide papers a couple months ago saying exactly that, saying, hey, we represent both sides of the political spectrum. We all either know Tim personally or know his businesses. This is disgusting. This is wrong. We should be celebrating successful Montana businesses, especially as a state. We've had a very challenging economic trajectory as a state. We were basically a corporate colony a century ago with mining and timber and railroads, where at one point in time, 75 cents of every dollar in the Montana economy was, one company, Anaconda Copper Company. And that guy is part of the reason the 17th Amendment exists, William Clark, because he decided to be a senator one day and the state legislature is basically able to buy him off. And he's part of the reason they said, we got to stop the state legislature piece for senators. We're going to elect him directly. But that's a rabbit hole we don't have to go down. So there's been times where Montana's been economically devastated, when the mining industry collapsed, when the forestry industry collapsed. And obviously now we're seeing a resurgence in our economy based on, of course, tourism. Everyone wants to come here now. And a lot of technology and engineering related businesses like mine that have based here to get away from the crazy massive tech hubs and business hubs in, California and Texas and the East Coast and come here. And as a result, that should be celebrated. Our businesses, Bridger Aerospace is our one we took public and most recently ran, but we had others too, including a technology company we built and sold for $350 million from scratch. And, from starting in the barn that I'm sitting in right now with 2 veterans getting out of the military, starting a company, we created over 400 jobs over the course of a decade, hundreds of millions of dollars of enterprise value, over $1 billion until they drove our stock down, but massive value creation, job creation, as you said, across the state, across the world, operate on several continents, and a lot of veteran jobs. And to put the cherry on top, guess what our mission is? It's to fight fires. It's to protect our communities. Our pilots go out and put their lives on the line to protect Montana communities and frankly communities all over the world. So for them to decide that they're just going to try to destroy that company just to make me look bad is really a disgusting new tactic in politics. I guess it's not that new. They've been doing it for Trump for a while, but now it's clear they're going to use this tactic down ballot. The business fair and the law fair, they're going to start using this on anybody who pokes their head up, who's a threat to their dominance. And, I'm telling you, they've been screwing with our regulators. They've been coming after us from the regulatory standpoint, going after our lenders, screwing with us from our lenders. And of course, just public smear to drive our stock down from short selling to lies in the press about us. And of course, the liberal media, WAPO, who of course now refused to endorse Kamala in some attempt to appear impartial, which is ridiculous. And a few others have decided, NBC News, of course, as well, have just published these incredibly misleading smear pieces on our business. And it's very clear the only reason is to label me as a failed businessman, which is just My businesses aren't perfect. I knew nothing about business when I started these companies. I made it up as I went along. I'll be the first one to say that, I made so many business mistakes. Like, I'll admit that day one, but the success can't be denied. When you start with 2 people and end up with hundreds of them, you start with no enterprise value and end up with almost $1 billion of it, hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue and payroll. There's no other way to really describe that other than a success. But you're right. They've decided to label that my military service, my personal history, and just try to shred everything in a ridiculous smear campaign with $170 million put behind it because Jon Tester can't run on the open border, record inflation, disastrous foreign policy. He can't run on those issues. So he's got to smear me instead.
Yeah. As I said, when I was down in Montana, you would expect that if you had a sitting U.S. senator and he did see a Montana business that he truly did think was having some sort of issue, his first thing he would say is, how can I help? He wouldn't pile on because these are local Montanan business. One last question. You mentioned it about the money. It's actually astonishing. I was just looking at an analysis from a couple of days ago. The money that has flown into this Montana Senate race is just eye-watering. As you noted, it's a big state, but not a huge population. And right now they're saying that the amount that has been spent is more than $300 per registered voter. I would imagine, by the way, that after all the ads they've been watching, some of them would prefer that you guys had just written them a check.
Yeah.
But one thing that popped out at me is the outside money, it's been about even. But if you look at the two campaigns, yours and his, he has spent close to $70 million and you've spent close to 20. Is that right? 20 million?
Actually, I think when the full race is tabulated, you'll see his number go above 100. So like last quarter, for example, we raised about $8.5 million last quarter, which for us, any Republican candidate running for Senate, that was fireworks, backflips, dance party, holy crap.
Sure.
Huge number. In the same quarter, he raised over $32 million in the same quarter as us. And that funding imbalance from hard dollar, as you said, the soft dollars we've been able to quasi even it out, but they're also far less effective. The hard dollars from day one, there's times they had 10 times more money than we do. It's crazy, the funding imbalance. His hard dollars are diluted by about 7 to 9x. When you actually put the weighted average, we'll have been outspent at the end of this thing. We'll see how his last couple of weeks are. I think last week he raised $9 million in a week or something like that. When you actually weighed everything out in the end, I think, it'll be about a 3-to-1 spending disadvantage considering that, if not more. But that's just in the final stretches. Early on, it was much higher. There was a period, I think it was 8 or 10 to 1, they were outspending us. So it's really sad that that's where we're at. We look, let's call it $300 million could be spent on this race. We are the most expensive race in American history per vote. Not even close. We've blown away every other race in history of this country. You look at, we got 600-ish thousand voters. You go to Ohio, that's going to be a $400 million race. They got 12 million people there. You go to Pennsylvania, probably 400 million. They got, 15 or 16 million people. If this race were held in Texas, it would be a $3 or $4 billion race. So you look,
oh my gosh.
After spending here, it's like, man, we could build a new destroyer for that. We talk about the military. We could buy a new fleet of fighter jets for this amount of money. It's shameful how we're just burning money in piles on these elections. It's about time campaign finance reform. We need it, no question. Not because it's unfair. It's ridiculous. But yeah, the spending imbalance has been crazy. And frankly, that's Tester's MO. You look at all of his elections, he gets a huge amount of money every time. And the more senior he's gotten, of course, he's chair of some very powerful committees, defense appropriations. Guess what? That's a lot of money goes through that committee. Banking and finance. He was on that committee for a long time. Veterans Affairs. How many billions of dollars, trillions of dollars have gone under this guy's pen? There's a lot of special interests. He's the number one recipient of lobbyist cash in the whole country of every politician. Number one, numero uno. And of course, massive dark money come in for him. There's a lot of people who are part of the status quo in DC that want him to stay exactly where he is, and they will spend a lot of money to keep him there. And obviously, if the Trump movement and the America First movement says anything, it's like, hey, our government is not serving its people right now. And it's about time we start some common sense reforms to get our budget under control, return accountability to our government, and make this country function again. And for a lot of folks that are sitting there on the Beltway living off the hog, they don't like the sound of that. So to put a cherry on top, it is the most expensive election in American history. We've been outspent massively. And the fact that we've gone from basically 0% name ID to leading 6, 7, 8 points is a testament to just incredible team we have, the hard work that we put in on the ground, just traveling the entire state constantly. That's also just a referendum on the failure of this administration.
Yeah, it strikes me that if you win, if other people win around, Donald Trump wins, this is going to be one of the big themes coming out and something for a post-game analysis, because the loud spending on the Democratic side against Republicans has been replicated across the country. And that is an interesting commentary on money versus issues. So, Tim Sheehy, thank you so much for being here. We got 7 or 8 days before the election, and we will be avidly watching to see how things turn out in Montana.
Thanks, Kim. We got to save America. Appreciate the time.
Thank you. I want to thank Tim Sheehy for joining us this week and all of our listeners for tuning in. If you like the show, please do hit that subscribe button. And if you'd like to write to us, you can at pwpodcast@wsj.com.